Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads for our reaction and review of Skeleton Crew Episode 6. We're going to be talking about every spoiler detail, all the stuff that happens in this week's episode. So, of course, as always, this is your spoiler warning. If you have not watched the episode, make sure you go watch it, come back, and join us. This is a short episode, shortest one of the season so far. Very unfortunate to me every time I look on a Disney Plus show and see a 30-minute runtime with credits, which makes it like 26 minutes or something like that. Crazy. But we're going to talk about all the things that happened because it wasn't necessarily all that bad because we did enjoy this week's episode. Make sure if you have thoughts to say about this week's episode, send them in that chat. We will answer all of your questions or as many as we can get through. We're going to be doing a shorter show tonight. This is going to be an hour-long show instead of an hour-and-a-half long show. I know I kind of teased that last week and we went an hour and a half. This one's hard and fast. We've all got stuff going on. It's New Year's Eve. So we're going to be doing an hour show. And then next week, we'll get to more of your guys' questions as we return back to the normal format. No more holidays next week. So we'll be for episode 7 and 8 doing the hour and a half to 2 hour long shows like you guys are used to. So hopefully if you have something that's not answered to this week and you don't want to pay for super chat, which is a way to guarantee that it is on tonight's show and doesn't get moved to next week. But if you don't want to do that or you can't afford the means to do that, that's all fair and good. Bring your questions next week and we will have our 2-hour show again. So again, super chats, best way to send in your questions, guarantees on the show. If not, we're going to go first come, first serve, starting from the top to the bottom. Make sure you like the video if you haven't liked it yet. Subscribe to the channel. We're covering every single Skeleton Crew episode, both in predictions format and these lives. So if you're interested in our thoughts for next week's episode, we'll be having a predictions episode for episode 7. We've done one for every other episode as well. If you want to go back and look at what our predictions were versus what actually happened. And then subscribe for all that. Comment below your thoughts if you're watching on replay. Comment in the chat. All that out of the way. Let's just get into our review as people start to trickle in here into the chat room. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Sanak, first for your thoughts. What did you think of episode 6 of Skeleton Crew?
Yeah, I think if you look at just the runtime, it is already like a negative that we all have kind of gotten accustomed to with Star Wars on Disney Plus. But sometimes the episodes do maximize what they have. And this is definitely another example of Bryce Dallas Howard coming in and doing some great directing. I almost felt like this was like the inverse of Book of Boba Fett episode 5, where looking back on it, while it was really fun and she got to spend a lot of time on it, not much happens there. And it's just more like a nice showcase of like, okay, we're gonna build up this N1 starfighter that'll become the new lead ship for Mando and all that. This is the opposite. You've got to do a lot with the kids here. And again, it's an ensemble, so it's not like Din Djarin and a puppet like Grogu. You got to give them all their time and all of these beats and everything, especially after the revelations, the twists and turns of the last episode. You're expecting some big stuff here. And I always expected, just with the structure of a lot of TV shows and general storytelling, once you get this big twist, big reveal, you got to come back down to something grounded, definitely about characterization and all that. So I wasn't too worried about that. But I will say I was really satisfied by what she did. She's been talking about how much she loves directing child actors and how much fun she had on Skeleton Crew. Obviously, she's probably the most experienced Mandalorian verse director at this point, so she knows how to kind of bridge the maturity, the story, the little tiny teases that are going to definitely be building and shaping this mini universe within Star Wars. But for this episode, all she had to do was say, hey, these kids are alone now. No sort of guiding hand, positive or negative. How did they react? How did they adjust? And she hit so many emotional beats. I think everyone, as much as they've liked this show, it's just like how it is with a lot of the episodes. You can understand Fern from the start because it's very clear who she is. And then you see a little bit of her backstory with her mother and kind of the double identity she lives. You see from the very start that Wim is a kid with dreams, head in the clouds, and wants to prove himself, wants to be that guy, step into that legendary like Jedi figure. And the reality, how it kind of comes back and forth to him throughout the show makes sense. Neil's just a kid who really wants to be good and sweet and wants everyone to be happy, and he's growing into that voice. We've seen that throughout. KB is the one that no matter if you've seen the story or you haven't, you're like, "Well, she just seems like she's there to be almost like that droid character." But
Mhm.
she's not. She's not a Mirror Lucan, she's not a Lobot without a voice, or she is a kid that speaks, that's still a pretty active member of the crew. She just doesn't speak up often. So, this is definitely an episode to showcase that, hey, there are reasons for that because she does feel like there are things that she wants to say more. She's a very capable person with all the tech inside her brain and all that, but how does that balance out with the needs of like a young girl? And I thought this was really sweet. This was really good for her to finally have that episode, even though she did definitely have a lot to do in 3 and 4. This is the first one that felt like she's owning it and she's evolving through it. And it was nice to see that the split off, the kind of pairings that we've been talking about happening in previous weeks finally happened here. We got Neil with Fern, and then we got KB with Wim, and you got to see Wim grow. You got to see like, hey, you can be a hero in different ways instead of just making that grand entrance. You can just do what's been asked. You can just step up and help a person when they're asking for it. And it was a nice little, not, I wouldn't say tongue in cheek, but it was pretty sweet that she's like, "Thanks, Jedi," after he helped kind of make that microfuse for her, and how much that meant to him, right? And same thing with Fern. She's headstrong. She wants to lead the way, but that's not necessarily a bad thing for her. She just believes that she can take everyone up with her, but she now has to learn, hey, what does that actually mean realistically, right? Just because you're super capable, just because you believe people are super capable, how do you bridge the gap? And she quite literally bridged it by taking that rope with Neil and helping him up and listening to him, right? So they both kind of learned the same things. They're kind of both two halves of one really good leader, honestly. And I think that's what's really coming out of this episode, that KB and Neil, definitely especially KB, help these 2 other kids shine and learn and make that adjustment. Like, kids don't really need too much depth and serious things happening in their life to learn something. Sometimes it can really be the simplest thing that becomes a foundational piece of their personality, the character
Mhm.
that they're developing into. And I think that's what Bryce really understood. She knew that it doesn't have to be big or grand, right? It doesn't have to just be so simple as like, let's just throw all our toys from our box here and see what comes out of it. It can just be like, hey, what do kids do on the playground, and how does that kind of translate here to, hey, you're lost in the big galaxy that you don't really know about. So I thought that was really good. I really enjoyed all that. There was definitely some spectacle with Fern kind of guiding the little lander guider things and helping reunite everybody. That was really sweet. And yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to see KB now fully realized as a character. Now I feel like they're all gonna kind of take turns, work together. And I don't know how we missed it in the predictions because we got the crab and a bunch of stuff, but we forgot about like the exploding hull and this little like devastator kind of machine that's breaking up the ship, right? Like that's also was on a snow planet. We did see in the trailer. So it all tied here nicely. And honestly, I think we can understand why they're called the skeleton crew now. They quite literally ripped the skeleton out of the ship, of the Onyx Cinder. Now it's a whole new ship. And that's how the episode ends. And the only other thing I can add is I did like Jude Law kind of getting to ham it up as a storyteller. That is a big thing about being a pirate. It's just how well can you sell conceit? How well can you sell the vision, the dream? And again, Jude Law kills it here. And I really enjoyed that. The only thing I really wish was that there was 1 or 2 minutes of with the parents just to continue building up a little bit more of that thread to see what Fern's mom and Wim's dad are really up to. But I guess we're really gonna save it for all the groups kinda combining and going really big and massive here in the final 2 episodes. So, I'm not gonna complain. Only thing I have to hope for here is that they're both pretty much like 50-minute episodes because now we've got so many people involved here. And hey, realistically, the X-Wings aren't just gonna give up. This is a second major sighting. There's pirates, there's everything kind of being tied in here. They're gonna have to try to sneak in some Mandoverse connections here too. So no cameo this episode, but Short, sweet, and I think it was really crucial for getting the kids to that, like, final place as a unit that is gonna be a really nice counter to Jod and whatever he's doing with his rebranded crew, and then, of course, there's definitely gonna be surprises now that we have the parents fully coming into the story again and whatever's going on with the supervisor and all that. So, yeah, again, I'm really enjoying this show.
I am too. I thought this was a good episode. It wasn't one of my favorites. The character building was strong, and I'm glad certain beats played out the way they did because certainly when the episode started, I was going, "Oh no, here we go," because it felt like problems created for problems' sake. Like, before you understood what was
Yeah.
behind the characters, it felt like these kids were all just faced a near-death experience. You would think they would have a little bit more of a conversation about that, more dissension about what's going on, and instead it turns into more arguments about they're upset at each other. So I was a little concerned at first, especially with the KB stuff, because I was like, I don't really understand why she's not happy with Fern. But they did a good job because then they took that exact same thing and Wim says it to her, why are you even upset? Type of thing. And
Yeah.
that's what I was thinking. And then they spin it and they explain it. And so I thought it was another good episode to flesh out these characters, especially because the kids have been so much so brought in as a group. It's always good to have those moments where you individualize them because they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. And so I appreciated that about this episode. Still, to me, this one, out of all the ones we've seen so far, felt like the one that could have had more. This one, and it's not just the runtime. I think it uses the runtime effectively, but in a TV show, there's so many different plot lines going on. There's always room to attach other things. Like you mentioned, there's the parents' angle that it could have gone back to. We could have done more with that. We could have done a little bit more with Jod. There, we could have done a little bit more with the Captain Renard stuff and like the legend of that pirate with all these other pirates. I would have loved to see a bit more of the pirate gang and that type of thing. So there's just little things that I think when you have a 30-minute episode, you could add those in and you're not really losing momentum or pace because it's not that type of episode, right? If this was the chase episode and it's cut for timing, it's cut for pace, it's cut to thrill you in an action sequence. That to me is a little bit more acceptable to be a shorter episode because you're building on style, right? This is an episode to me that doesn't necessarily build as much on style, it builds on character. So there's more time if you're only focusing on character, if you're only having discussions. That's great. I think every show needs that, but you could have done more with that. And so I do think this was a bit of a missed opportunity, especially with such a big turn last week. Could have done more with the time allotted here. But the content that was here was still solid, and I did still enjoy that. So that was my biggest critique is, like, watching it, I can't help but feel that there is a missed opportunity to piggyback on the falling action of last week's episode since it ends on such a cliffhanger. But we don't get really Jod's perspective on his escape. I would have loved to see him go through a few more traps and stuff like that. Love to see him talking to SM-33, see what the difference is between, him as the captain and Fern, and see SM-33 maybe talking and saying, well, that's not how Captain Fern would do it, or that's not how Captain Renard would do it. Just little moments like that that we saw between the kids, I would have loved to see for all the other characters as well. So that's my big criticism. Other than that, good stuff here. I thought it was well directed as well. Uh, I love the last scene. I love when they work together to get the ship off the ground. And now it's just an all-out chase to Atten. It's a race. Everybody's going to be going for it. And I think that's where the parents will come back in next week. We're going to have everybody going after it. And I fully expect the end of next week to see who the supervisor is and whether it is Captain Renard or not, or in a descendant. Because they make another point about it again in this episode. He's dead. Is he? So we'll see. We'll see how it goes next week. but I do fully expect that reveal and it just to be this full-on chase. We're gonna get to Atten next week finally, and we'll see how all of the rest of these components start to unfold and connect and intertwine, because this has been a well-written show in terms of its structure, because I think it's one of the few Disney Plus Star Wars shows really to have each episode feel like you earned something from the previous one, even if it's a small victory. There's been a lot of Disney Plus Star Wars shows that feel like we do filler episodes or an episode of the week or an episode that starts a plot line that never ends up being important or doesn't come back. So there is a succinctness to this show that I really appreciate. And even if that means not much happens, I'm glad it's still sticking to that and not creating some new plot line for no reason just to fill time. So those are my thoughts. Let us know in the chat your guys' thoughts. We do have some comments already in the chat tonight, so we're going to get to those. Again, this will be a shorter episode for those of you just joining us. We're going to only go about an hour. So if you have your thoughts, get them in quickly because we won't be here all night. And then a super chat will guarantee you get on the stream tonight. If you don't send in a super chat, we will try to get to you, but it is all based on how quickly we get through the rest of the chat. So starting in the chat at the top, we have Anthony Tiff, who says, Happy New Year, guys. I hope you guys had a good time or good Christmas with your families as I did. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's to you too, Anthony. It is New Year's Eve for us over here on the West Coast, so Happy New Year's to all of you guys in the chat. My Christmas was pretty good. I got the flu on the Christmas day, which sucked, but everything before that was all right. So it was okay, but I'm glad you had a good Christmas too.
Yeah, definitely Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to all, and looking forward to a Happy New Year. So, yeah, I'm glad you could join us, Anthony. Yep, definitely spent some time with my family and my family friends. So, yeah, had a pretty good time.
And I'm still fighting through this cough from the flu. So if I have to pause for a coughing attack during this stream, I'm sorry about that in advance. But I'm doing all right now. Hopefully, I didn't jinx myself. Anthony says it's funny that back in June of this year, I could not find much of an oasis from the toxic discourse regarding the fandom, but I found one. Since I am on here almost every week, I almost consider you guys friends. Maybe someday we will meet in person at a fan event or Comic Con. That would be great. We love chatting with all of you too. The only negative with chatting with all of you here is that we don't get to see you guys, so you get to see our faces, but we don't get to have more personal interactions. But we'd love to meet you guys in person. So if we do go to any events or cons and that opportunity is there to meet, we would love that. We did go to Celebration in 22 because it was in Anaheim, and now the last two have been overseas. We've said for years that we would definitely want to go back to another Celebration if it was in the United States, but making it to Japan and where was it before? London?
Europe, yeah, in London.
That was going to be a little tougher. For me, I was in Japan when it happened in London, so I couldn't go. And then Japan this year, it Japan at that time of the year is just an expensive endeavor, and I've already been during that time of the year, and it's great, but it is packed. So I just kind of made a decision I wasn't going to go, but I don't think Sanak is either. Not sure 100% what our plans are around that. We were thinking of maybe reaching out to some of you guys if you're going to Celebration and seeing if anybody wanted to be a reporter for us over there. But we plan on covering it hopefully in 2026, because I'm sure 2026 will be a huge celebration because of the Mandalorian and Grogu movie coming, the whole slate of movies they have coming. That's going to be the year for them to kind of like they just did in 2023, but everything changed again. That's going to be another year for them to make new announcements, tell us what their plans actually are, and hopefully give us some information about the future of Star Wars TV, because right now it's kind of crazy to think about because Star Wars has been a TV only franchise since 2019. we don't know what's coming next after Andor. We have no announcements after Andor other than Ahsoka season 2, which is coming in 2026. So it's a blank slate. So hopefully they announce some stuff in 25 at Celebration, and we're looking forward to 26. Hopefully it's back in the United States. We're planning on going for that one, and hopefully we can meet you there, Anthony.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can add to that is we are definitely looking forward to really connecting more with you guys in 2025. Unexpectedly, this was like a huge, huge year of growth, not even a number we expected. If you're on the channel right now, you can see we've reached 20K, which was a target, for us the last couple months after all this really unexpected strong growth. And then it slowed down a lot. And then we're like, okay, are we going to even make it? But we managed to kind of kick back in, especially because everyone's been really, really enjoying themselves with Skeleton Crew, and we've definitely been enjoying all the discussions with you guys. So yeah, I mean, 20K. How do we make it better for you guys? We've got the community tab. Everyone really enjoys that. But yeah, we're definitely trying to to roll out a Discord that's definitely gonna have a little bit more thought put behind it before we fully release it to the public. We wanna, like Liam said, get someone on the ground there at Celebration, be sort of a reporter and, maybe make a connection a little bit beforehand so we're not just, like, saying, "Hey, just go there and do something that we can't do," right? So, we wanna make sure that we use this fandom in a really positive way for you guys and for ourselves and actually be a lot more connected. Our socials have been pretty up to date on Twitter and Blue Sky, not so much Instagram. That's on me, but things are getting revamped. This channel will start looking a lot more serious and more evolved, I guess more sophisticated by the time Andor comes out because, that is probably the most sophisticated Star Wars show out there. But yeah, I mean, we're going into a year unknown, and the only thing we can definitely rely on is having stuff like this where we can talk with you guys about anything and all things Star Wars that, maybe some things that we say here inspires you guys with what you're looking into Star Wars, what you're entertaining with Star Wars, and some things that you guys tell us, maybe that helps us come up with some cool original content that will, definitely give a lot of credit to you guys for. So yeah, community is a big focus for us. We think we've done a couple good solid steps for this year for sure, especially with this unexpected growth, but we definitely want to make it even more worthwhile for everybody this year in 2025.
We have a super chat from Araya Ben Yah, who says KB is Tion Solisar in canon in this episode. And then says, Star Wars fans, we found Tion Solisar in canon. KB may have been a Jedi youngling in the past. I'm very curious what gives you the impression that she was a Jedi youngling in the past. I don't know if I caught that. I missed that if that was in the episode somewhere. I could see maybe the comparison in terms of her empathy, because Tion is very empathetic. One of the things that connects her to in the rest of the Jedi Order, and specifically Cam, who goes through a lot. But yeah, and maybe the hair color, but Tion doesn't have augmentations, does she? I don't remember her having augmentations.
No.
She's like kind of a half human, right? And so, let me know, clarify that. We'll come back to you, but clarify what you mean by that, what connections you saw, because I'm very curious how you see that or where you saw that in the episode. But thank you for the super chat.
Yeah, I guess if you're saying perhaps in the way that they're both like very scholarly, I think Tion's a little bit more like the books and practical experiences. KB's a little bit more like, hey, I've got a literal augmentation, a computer, a supercomputer kind of attached to my brain. Maybe in that sense, like Liam said, empathetic. They do have very calm personalities in ways too. So I could see that. But if we're, trying to explore it a little bit more, I mean, it would be interesting if like characters that have the force uh, get these lobot supercomputer augmentations to kind of stop them, right? It'd be very interesting if, hey, like this is just a way to like stop you from like connecting not to the force because the force flows through all living beings, but maybe stop whatever connections you have to your body's midichlorians, maybe stop your ability in your brain to even like think and feel things about like telekinesis and all that. Just like maybe like a neural stop in general. I mean that would be pretty interesting. Um, But yeah, I guess you have to really expand on that. I don't know exactly where you're coming from, but that's kind of just my food for thought there.
Scrolling back up to the top, we have Anthony who says, "One thing I really appreciate about your guys' content is that it's always humble, honest, and in good faith. Even when we disagree, I know you guys are coming at it from a good heart. I hope I never meant the opposite." No, we always are just here to talk Star Wars. We don't take anything personally. If you guys disagree with us, that's fine. We're just in giving our point of view, and we're hoping that you guys give yours, and we'll comment on it the best we can. We appreciate that, Anthony. Thank you so much for seeing that in our content.
Yeah, definitely appreciate it, Anthony. That's kind of why we started this whole thing in the first place. Give a space to talk about Star Wars with nuance. And if it comes off as humble, that's awesome. But really, the only thing we're trying to do is give our perspective, give our filmmaking background and our connections there, and see how, a little bit more of like a practical, everyman understanding of Star Wars with all that little bit knowledge kind of trickled in. And if that's working, great. That's what we strive for, and we always want to hear from you guys, because just because we think we know Star Wars, that's not really what Star Wars is about. It's completely subjective. There's so many different things to pull from, so many different eras and characters. We can't ever say that we're the greatest Star Wars fans, but we'd like to say that we're passionate and want to make sure that everyone else gets to have a space to be passionate.
Anthony also says Jod sounds just like Jack Sparrow from the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie when he talks to the pirates. Yeah, he does. Pirate speeches are always really fun because it kind of shows the smart ones from the dumb ones, right? That's kind of a classic trope with pirate stuff. Is like the masses, most of the people there are just there to plunder and kill and eat and steal and get fortune, and nobody sells pirates as the most intelligent people in fiction. And so there's always that one, that captain, that swindler who kind of talks circles around everybody else, and everybody is like, yeah, that sounds good to me, because they sound so confident in the way they say it. And so I thought the way Jod delivered that was great. I like the skepticism from Brutus. I think that's going to be a really fun dynamic as we get into the next episode. But yeah, really enjoyed that scene. I really wanted more scenes with Jod and the pirates, but I loved the one we got.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, fully agree. I think there should have been more. There wasn't, but sometimes a tale is enough, right? I wish like the episode had like another minute or two, because when we see the ship is finally escape all the X-wings, and you see like kind of their space station that they're at, immediately you're at the trial, right? It's not even like let's land and kind of push Jod and have him see like how his old digs look like and all that. So yeah, I mean, it's it's a unfortunate reality that there's always one episode in every Star Wars show that is a bit shorter. Luckily, this one kind of mostly skirts away with it, because it's so focused on the kids and what they're doing, and how they're facing another continuous series of like unfortunate events, and how they're actually dealing with it now without a guiding hand. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely understand that some of the stuff that Bryce was going for can feel a bit reminiscent of some other stuff, can feel a bit tropey. Like for me, when I was watching the scene where KB and is kind of guiding Wim on how exactly to like create a new microfuse, right? That almost felt like the Tony Stark Pepper Pot
Mhm.
scene in Iron Man 1, where he's like, yeah, you're just putting in like basically a new electromagnet to save my heart and the shrapnel that's piercing its way through it there. It's like, I could die, but, it's fine, right? It felt like that, a little bit more serious, honestly. Definitely not maybe not the same stakes, but, it definitely feels like this is an episode that, because it knows it has a limited runtime, it does kinda have to lean on things that you're already familiar with in pop culture, in other stories. So, yeah, I mean, if it comes off as Jack Sparrow, I honestly think that's pretty intentional.
I think so too. I think it's this show, pretty much everything it's done in the pirate realm is pulled from popular pirate inspirations. And I think with Pirates of the Caribbean, we've seen it already, a lot of direct references. I mean, they even said like bilge rats in this episode. It's a lot of things that you hear from both the ride and the movies. So it's a lot of iconic stuff there. And so I absolutely think they pulled it from Pirates as a main inspiration. Scrolling down here, we got another super chat from Anthony. Thank you so much, Anthony, who says, are you guys worried that due to your guys' growth, there is going to be more toxic people in the comments? Also, do you guys agree with the idea that the Sith will always return? Well, thank you so much for that chat. As for your first question, that's, I think, a concern when you do YouTube in any form, doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are. And we've had the occasional person who is disagreeing with us. We've also had a lot of great conversation with people who don't agree with us on a lot of different things. So it's I wouldn't say it's a concern, um, but or a worry, as you say, but it is something that will probably become more common as we grow bigger and bigger because we're going to be fed out, hopefully, by YouTube's algorithm to more and more people, and the more people you get watching your content, the more likely you are to find somebody who disagrees with you. So we're always going to stay the same on this channel, our personalities. We're going to keep making content that we value in terms of our experience with Star Wars. And if those people don't like it, then they don't have to watch. But
Yeah.
we're going to welcome everybody, even people who disagree with us, because we want to hear their thoughts as well and why they disagree with us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, criticism is healthy for us. I don't think you guys don't really get to see, but like there are definitely things about Star Wars that Liam and I don't agree on, right off camera. Like when we start up our streams, you have a little bit of time to talk. When you do predictions, do our own individual videos, it's not like because we both do the channel, because we're really good friends, that everything is 100% the same, no, right? But I think we found a good balance. We know how to talk to each other respectfully. We know how to address the things that we do or don't like, and that's what helps this channel grow, right? Like, it can't have done that if we didn't understand the balance that we both need, and it's the same way with our fan base, with our community. I think the people that we've attracted has come out because we put the energy between our interactions to make sure that they're strong, that they're valid. When we're not happy with each other, when we're feeling great about the stuff that we're doing together, we make it known, right? It's better to be honest and open about it, and that's what helps us, right? And it's the same thing here. A lot of you guys, if you don't like something or you don't agree with what we said, you will tell us. I don't think we've ever heard someone say like, "I don't wanna tell you guys, but I just disagree and I just don't wanna." No, you guys feel honest and you feel open to being able to say that, and that's good. That's kinda what, again, what comes at full circle. We're trying to cultivate that fan base, and luckily for us, so far, for the most part, things have been really solid, especially on these lives, because we have been cultivating lives and it's a little bit more personal. It's a little harder, I think, especially with the size of her channel, for someone to just come in and like try to ruin everything for everyone. Because then everyone's like, dude, we're just trying to have a good time and talk Star Wars here. So I think it's both where we've started from our personal lives, our personal interactions, and it's really reflected with what we're seeing here in our lives and on our videos. Something that's a little less personal is probably like a community tab, because it's just really just polls and characters, and that just comes down to who's better, who's worse, right? And everyone's opinions come out, right? And it's not gonna be as personal because we can't really jump into a 40 thread comment, right? It's not really the point of our channel. It's just a nice little addition. So yeah, I think there will be challenges moving forward and addressing how we communicate with you guys, what is cool with us, what isn't cool with us, what we want to give space for people to say and do. It'll be a learning process for sure, but I think for the most part, we're gonna avoid the toxicity because we make sure we're not toxic to each other, and I think you guys see that, and you make sure that you're not toxic to each other as well.
As for your second question, do you guys agree that the Sith will always return? I I think that you can have variations of the Sith. What I've always said is that I don't mind the Crate Sith, the One Sith. I don't mind Lost Tribe of the Sith. I don't mind variations, changes, new takes, but spun from the original idea. Because to me, that's not the Sith. Those are offshoots of the
Yeah,
Sith. And so I subscribe to the idea that the dark side will never die. I think that's what I would agree with more. The dark side will always return in some form, but kind of like they did originally, before they completely backtracked on it with the sequels, right? They did Kylo Ren and Snoke as not Sith because they were trying to honor the fact that Darth Vader killed the final Sith and he, became the chosen one. And then they brought Palpatine back, right? So they both did as the same team, J.J. Abrams. They did it one way and then they completely backtracked on it later, right? And so I don't really like the idea of the Sith returning post Return of the Jedi, just because I think it does mess with the Chosen One prophecy, the Anakin prophecy, because it's specifically all targeted about destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. Like that's the name of the game with the philosophy. But if you have there's always going to be the dark side, in my opinion. So any other offshoot religions, any other offshoot philosophies that worship the dark side or use the dark side, to me, that's fine when they do it in the future. But I'm hoping they don't necessarily go directly back to the Sith. The one though that I do have a little bit more mixed feelings towards is Darth Caedus and Jason, because part of that is interesting because it comes through a family that kind of keeps that idea alive, right? Like a family that knows about the Sith, that's wary about the Sith, that had Sith in their family. The patriarch of the family was a Sith. I think that's where like the lines are kind of blurred a little bit. Is it like somebody who falls to the dark side and embraces some of the Sith ideology via the Skywalker lineage, I think is actually like it's towing the line between what's okay and what's not based on that chosen one prophecy. But I think it falls more in the like, okay, that's interesting. I'm intrigued and semi okay with it side of that line. But if it was just to be like, oh, actually, Palpatine had a secret apprentice who was off in another galaxy and showed up 60 years later because he had a transmitter that said he was supposed to show up then and just appears out of nowhere and has an army of Sith, I think that would be pretty stupid. Something like that I wouldn't really like. I think that would kind of defeat the purpose. So I think there's both good and bad ways to do it.
yeah, I have a lot of the same feelings about the Sith coming back. Again, I don't mind Lost Tribe. I don't mind the One Sith, and I think those two definitely make a good distinction. And I mean, they're kind of connected, anyways. Um, you can look at the Sith of the Old Republic, right? Especially when it was like armies of Sith and not Bay Knight Sith. The Sith that we think about, the original Sith, the rule of two, is not for the most part the original Sith idea. I know you can look at Tales of the Jedi with Exar Kun and Ulick, but that's not really. That was just more of like, hey, you both are super equally matched, but this ghost is just gonna be like, hey, I'm gonna choose one as the master, one as the apprentice. It wasn't meant to be that. Revan and Malik were not meant to be Bane. I'd say they were an inspiration for what Bane eventually does, right? So the Sith can always come. They should always evolve. I think that's the one thing about them is that they can never die. It's frustrating, but they won't completely ever die off. But when they do come back, they come back with a vengeance. They come back with changes that are necessary and reflective of the time period, the era that they're in, and usually the apathy of the good people or the people who have just kind of gotten used to the norms of like everything will be fine, everything will be good, things are great, okay. Like the more allowance they give, when the Sith have, for the most part, the most success, especially post Old Republic. You can say Old Republic is just equal powers. There's no real imbalance, like, for a lot of the old Star Wars: The Old Republic, they are basically splitting the galaxy in half, so it's really afterwards when they're always trying to be the usurpers, where they're always a smaller group, that's when they should always be evolving and changing to me because they kinda have to. That's the only way to defeat something that is so normalized, so kept up, so rigid as sometimes as the Jedi Order and the Republic can be. You have to be, like, almost like a terroristic force that completely upends everything, right? That's why, when we see something like the High Republic, it's not necessarily dark side, but the Nile have been so successful because they have been something unexpected. They have been striking at the core of a specific enemy in the Jedi and all that. So, yeah, I think it's definitely possible. My issue with something like the Kata stuff that Liam brings up is that you were really just trying to force Lumia to become the Sith Master. Vergier is not really a Sith at when she's first introduced, and then she's retconned into being one. So that just felt like after so much of the stakes and the changes and the potential of looking at the Force, especially the unifying Force concept in such a very, very different way for decades of Star Wars to come, in 5 years, you're like, "Nope, never mind, like, we're just gonna do something very similar to the prequels politically, and then we're gonna go back to basics with the Force being light and dark," and there's some good things about it, there's some bad things about it, but I tend to skew negative with how it starts off, like, the people influencing Cadus, right? So, yeah, that I don't love that. I really don't mind the one Sith. I do think that it's kinda convenient that they live for so long, and same thing with the Lost Tribe of Sith, though I do think the Lost Tribe has a little bit more, uh, worth to me in the way that they survive and their roots specifically, like, it'd be really interesting to see Sith continue distinctly in separate for different periods, supposedly be destroyed, then Sith come back and become like Bay Knights or whatever, and then the descendants or the people who picked up the pieces of that original version of the Sith kinda come out. That's what I like. I like Sith kinda breaking the lineage. The line was broken, it's been unbroken, right? Like, and it's how what have you skipped over? Like, what is different? What are some things that you could have learned from the Bayonet Sith that are missing? Like, stuff like that, I think is super interesting. I just don't like it when it's a successive and then it feels too similar, too same, and contrived in some ways. So, yeah, and kinda going to that the whole Rens and so that stuff, yes, it's definitely undercooked. I don't actually mind Palpatine kinda pulling the strings with Snoke and making this whole facade of, like, the dark side doesn't have to rely on the Sith. It just needs so much more story. It needs Snoke to become a character to really work and needs that 30 years fleshed out. I think it will eventually be something that's at least good, maybe good enough at worst. So I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, 300 years from now, I would not be surprised if a Sith shows up. I just don't think in this Rey's New Jedi Order era and all the movies and stuff that will be coming out, I just really don't expect to see a Bay Knight Sith or like a Sith that feels like it's evolved from where we left off with Palpatine or is indebted to Palpatine. It has to be distinct, and I think that's the only way to keep them fresh and feel like you're still continuing the general ideologies.
And then to kind of add to that with Anthony's second super chat, which again, thank you so much for your super chats tonight, both Anthony and Araya. We'll get to yours, Araya, and like your comment about Tion here in a couple seconds. But Anthony just clarifies that he believes that, in his opinion, the chosen one is meant to be permanent, and that's a fair point of view too. I think I would like to see, as I've said many times on this channel, I would like to see Star Wars go away from the dark side versus the light side concept for some type of story. It's one of my favorite parts about New Jedi Order and High Republic that we're doing right now are these initiatives that go away from light side versus dark side, creates a grander threat for the Jedi, really kind of allows them to be the guardians of peace and justice like they were. But, they were that during a period of time that was peaceful. Most of the time when we've seen them be guardians of peace and justice, it's them fighting the Sith in the Old Republic, or it's them fighting the Sith in the Clone Wars. It's, constantly that good light versus dark dynamic. So I'm intrigued and want to see them in movies now. I want to see them bring in those other elements of like utilizing the Star Wars galaxy to create a threat for the Jedi. Don't necessarily have to always do it. And in that way, Anthony, you know, you can make the Chosen One prophecy more permanent if you don't keep bringing in Force users to fight the Jedi. So I'm cool with that as well. I feel like they've just already made it not permanent now by bringing back Palpatine, which Legends did as well, but it was a mistake then, and it's still a mistake. So I think they messed with it. But also when Legends did it, there was no Chosen One prophecy. That's the thing, is we didn't have the Chosen One prophecy when Legends brought Palpatine back. That was a prequel concept that came out 6 or 7 years after Dark Empire. So they brought back Palpatine just because they thought might as well bring back Palpatine. But now we do it knowing that there's a concept that the one guy that you were supposed to destroy, Vader, oh, he's back. I think that's the thing that rubs a lot of people the wrong way, especially about that. But what I think, to kind of clarify one more of my points before we move on, is just I more prefer it not being somebody who's already alive who comes back as a villain, because I think you can't. I don't know if the Force can really account for the fact that it can wipe out the dark side in new generations forever. Anakin's the one decision wiped it out forever. It's never coming back ever. But it should have wiped out the Sith permanently from the galaxy that we knew as of 4 ABY and Return of the Jedi. I don't like the idea of there being a secret Sith who was also a part of the Baneite lineage, the Palpatine Vader lineage existing somewhere else like that. If they did that, I think that would be a really bad mistake. So moving on from that to back to the Araya's first super chat about Tion, because Araya clarified that KB mentioned an accident, and both KB and Tion maybe could read artifacts. And there was a second episode that she says someone was coming. So to clarify that second part, I think that was because she has a visor that can kind of see through walls, and X-ray kind of vision thing. That's what I took out of it when she said she saw somebody coming. Same thing with reading the artifacts, that she has data in her augmentations that allows her to translate the different languages, because she has a computer brain, basically. She's got these augmentations that enhance her and give her the ability to do things that other people can't. So I don't necessarily read that as the same thing as Tion being able to use the Force or Tion speaking different languages. But hey, Tion would be a cool character to bring back, especially because she's lesser known. The only problem you have is with that timeline is it would make Tion far younger than she was in Legends, because KB is living only a couple of years. She's, whatever age she is, 10, only a couple of years before Tion was a adult and a part of Luke's Jedi Order. So we're only a couple of years removed from where the Kevin J. Anderson books would start with in Legends, because that I believe was 11 and 12
Yeah.
ABY. And right now we're at around 9 to 10 ABY with KB. So the timelines would be completely off. So basically you'd have to have Tion now exist as a Jedi under Rey's tutelage or the end of Luke's tutelage, versus her being one of the leading teachers in Luke's Jedi Praxium. So it would kind of change her story, especially with where we know Luke heads and what happens to him and all the Kylo Ren stuff. So I think it would completely change the story. So that would be my only other defense against it not being Tion, but it would be interesting if they pulled some more ideas from that concept and brought some to canon.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily against the idea of some of these EU Jedi that have really been pushed heavily in the Bantam era, kind of being spread out. It makes sense to kind of put some in later eras, especially because of how Luke's Academy's result has been framed so far, and the fact that Rey is going to be leading this next generation, which would be very different because Luke, even though he is of close enough age to kind of where he is in Crucible in The Last Jedi and all that, it's still like at least a decade or so at minimum. So yeah, it'll be interesting. I don't know if I would say that we're gonna get a girl who doesn't have any acknowledgement or understanding of the Jedi besides some of the stories that she hears, to be someone that becomes like a Tion. Like Tion kind of grows up with Jedi lore. That's kind of a thing for her. That's why it's such an embedded thing in her scholarly pursuits and her field expeditions. So I'm not 100%, seeing what you're seeing. I think it is pretty easy to look at like, hey, she was able to see something or she's noticed or sensed someone, but it's I think it is the visor, right? I think there's some limitations to what they're doing with the character PB so far. She hasn't really used her augmentations as a power up. I think that is kind of a big thing about this episode. It's it's good, it's strong, it definitely has its benefits, like, like maybe being able to zoom and see things from a distance or an infrared or whatever, right? But it's not necessarily something that she has a mastery over to make you feel like, "Oh, she's sensing things before it even happens," right? I don't necessarily see that, and I think it's because we also just haven't seen any, like, interesting shots of her, like, zoomed in vision. Like, it would've been pretty interesting, for example, when she sees the ship kinda being devoured, if we could zoom in and kinda see, like, oh, from her eyesight, she's seeing, like, the big chewing claws and all that, right? But we haven't, and even when she says, "Oh, my servos are kind of like shutting down here," it's like, what does that really mean to us, right? A servo in a practical world kind of feels like a gear, kind of feels like something motorized that we'd be able to see. And for the most part, it's just hidden in the back of her head, and we only get to see that microfuge. So I think that's a pretty interesting way of looking at like, hey, like KB and her abilities. But I think this episode also makes a big emphasis on even though she underrates parts of herself and her willpower is something that she really needs to grow and embrace more. She also is a kid and a young girl trying to learn and kind of deal with what is basically essentially a Star Wars version of a disability.
Yeah, and her accident seems to have been something that caused her to, need these augmentations to live. So
Yeah.
it's not doesn't seem chosen that she or her parents chose to give her augmentations. She picked them because, or she was forced to have them to keep her alive. So
Yeah.
well, I guess maybe we'll find out a little more about that later. It'd be interesting to find out more about that. But thank you so much for the super chat. And then you sent in another one, Araya. Thank you. Saying the fact is that Atten mystery should end with the introduction of finding new characters from legends brought into canon. Fern and Ray look almost related. Tie Farah and Fern to Ray's mother as being related to Kenobi and Duchess Satine Kryze because this could give a new open to New Jedi Order era by the time of Episode 10. Um, okay, that's a lot. And then it says fans say let's see more Force user families other than the Skywalkers. I agree with that part. I would love to see the progression of Force user families back from Legends into canon. I'd love to see Rey's new Jedi Order basically be Luke's new Jedi Order, where it changes kind of that philosophy of the Jedi and makes it a little bit more family oriented, family centric. I think it would be different. It'd be fun. It'd be interesting. And it would be something that connects back to older lore, which I always appreciate. So agree with that last part. As for the rest of it, I would love more characters from Legends brought into canon. Realistically, for this show, I pretty much only see Old Republic characters being brought back into canon at this point. And I think it would be Old Republic characters who are just kind of mentioned as myths or legends themselves, kind of like we already have, where we're we know that Revan and Malik and all these characters are canon because they got named after in some of the squadrons of the Sith troopers in the Rise of Skywalker. But that's all that we know about them as canon. Same with Darth Bane. He has one appearance in an episode of Clone Wars as a ghost, and then has mentions throughout a bunch of different stories in the High Republic and other things. So we, I think, would get similar type of treatment if we brought any Legends characters into canon in this specific show. So I don't think, and don't get your hopes up for the finale to be this big epic thing where all these Legends characters appear out of nowhere. I don't see realistically happening. Even if It is something that I'm waiting for. I'm hoping that we get more Legends characters start to show up throughout the rest of this time period between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. And as for Fern and Farah uh, and Ray, it's an interesting idea because we don't know really what the extent of Miramir's family is. We know she was born. I think we had this conversation before with some people. She was born on Hypercarn, I'm pretty sure, which is a space station. And her family, she had a grandmother who basically raised her and not much else. So maybe you could say she was pulled from somewhere like Atten as a kid, and her grandma was adoptive grandma and all this stuff. You know, you could change it up a little bit but from what we know about Ray's parents as of now, her mom was frankly a nobody, like Kylo Ren says. She wasn't important, and her dad is obviously related to Palpatine, is a failed clone of Palpatine. So we know he doesn't have any other family that could connect to somebody like Obi-Wan or Duchess Satine. So I'd hate to keep poo-pooing a lot of your ideas, but I don't think most of those could happen in terms of this show. I don't think that's the show's reach. I don't think it's what it's going for. This is a show that wants to stay smaller. It wants to be more compact. It wants to be about this group of characters on this adventure at this time. And I don't think they're really going to give us too much extra in terms of lore outside of maybe some references, some name drops, some icons on a wall, stuff like that. I think is the full extent of what we're going to get in terms of lore expansions, but I don't really expect these characters to be tied in to the grander Star Wars galaxy really in any form.
Yeah, I think that is a pretty key point there. Whatever happens can have ramifications for the Mandoverse, but is it gonna be massive? No. I mean, it might have a if it even has a passing reference in the Mandalorian Grogu, that's a huge success for this film, right? That's definitely something that could kind of be inserted a little bit later with ADR and stuff, right? Like if like Din Djarin's like, "Oh yeah, I heard about these kids, right? That you guys couldn't find for so long." Bam, right? That's really the max that's gonna happen when it comes to at least bigger stories like a movie. As far as this pocket universe that is the Mandoverse, things can happen. If we were like back in season 2 and we saw back on Navarro, the tank that looked like it had the Snoke clone and everything, and honestly, it still might have been, and then this Proto Snoke was then used to make the Gideon clones or something. Yeah, then I think at that point in time, I would have been like, yeah, there are chances that these kids will have bigger connective tissue than we think. At this point, I don't think so. I do agree, like Liam said, want more forced families, but they kind of have to start. I'd be pretty interested to see Luke not necessarily support it, but not be against it, where he and then maybe have his own dalliances and be like, maybe that's I don't think I should encourage this in the academy. If it happens, it happens. Whereas Ray is a little bit more like, yeah, but we can learn to balance that out. We can learn to work things out and find a nice middle ground, right? If you, I don't want Luke to continuously just be like the prequelization that he had of that Book of Boba Fett episode. It is a very strange characterization, even compared to the rest of what we've got in canon for him, because he's like very adamant that Grogu can't have attachments, even though Grogu's arguably the one who's seen and learned in the prequel era more than he ever could
Yeah.
piece together, right? So it's like, oh, okay, sure. And he's a kid. Like, are we really gonna say that's that terrible in this new age? You did it for your love for your father saved him and all that. Like that's a pretty key point there, Luke. So yeah, I think it's a matter of just learning to navigate and lay it out. I wouldn't be surprised if we get like a Cam Solusar who descendants we have, or rumored Corran Horn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, right? So we can kind of see some of those lineages, but I think that's kind of the max of like what they could tease for this time period. And time period is not the same as, you know, Disney Plus show era that we're in. So that could happen concurrently and still have nothing to do with Skeleton Crew. And Yeah, I mean, some of the names that you put, like, "Oh, let's get Duchess Satine and all that," like, yeah, I want Satine to be a bigger player. You know, everyone said Corky must be the forbidden love child of her and Obi-Wan, right? And maybe. I mean, that's been a fan theory for a long time, but it gives me personally a pause just because I think it's better to build up all these different characters, these families, all these things that you're saying in multiple different mediums, multiple different stories, so that it's a fun thing for fans who kept up with everything once we see them in New Jedi Order, along with some of these other new fresh faces, versus being like, oh man, like it's all built up in this one show that you have to watch before New Jedi Order. That kind of shrinks the world to me. That's kind of a thing that a lot of legends, especially Bantam era, a lot of later legends gets accused of. And I don't think Disney has really fallen into that same pit trap. So I would hope that they avoid it and they do make connections. They do you know, honor a lot of the legend stuff that we do absolutely like and wouldn't really mind seeing. But tying stuff so connected through every show, through every movie, it's just not a way to get general audiences on board.
Well, we have been streaming for about an hour. We do have one more super chat to get to from Anthony. And again, at this point, we have to wrap up our stream. So if you want to get any more comments on, please send in a super chat. It would help the channel out. Get your comment on tonight's stream. If not, this is the shorter stream tonight for those of you just joining us, only about an hour because it's New Year's Eve. And we will be back next week with our longer, like 2-ish hour stream, like we usually do for these episodes. And we'll be back for episode 7 and 8 next week. So make sure you join us for that. Also, do me a favor, like the video. We have a lot more people watching right now than I've liked. So that also really helps out the channel. Hope you guys are all enjoying your New Year's so far. And then to wrap up the stream, unless we get any more super chats from Anthony, he says in the novel Master and Apprentice, it is implied balance of the force is temporarily the moment between breaths. I'm kind of confused by what that means, and in what context you're sending this in. Is it your indirect reference to the idea that we've discussed um, about the light side and the dark side in terms of the chosen one prophecy and the balance to the force? I mean, that's been a conversation from people forever about what does the balance of the force mean. Does it mean that when Vader kills all the Jedi except for Yoda and Obi-Wan that it's balanced because there's too light, too dark left, and that's a balance? Does it mean that the dark side is defeated and the force is back into balance, into harmony with itself because it's not being abused by the dark side? I don't know. Different creators have run with it in different directions, right? You have the idea of these dark places that you see in in The Empire Strikes Back and in The Last Jedi, um, where there is obviously dark energy feeding, but it's kind of in The Last Jedi, especially shown as more of like a kind of like a cancer almost. It's like feeding off the planet. It's this festering hole. It's not some place of balance. And so I think what George was meaning with that is a bit more of like the spiritual idea of balance, not necessarily the literal idea of like one light, one dark equals the same amount of weight on a scale. It's more the spiritual idea of balance, and the dark side is imbalanced. It's always constantly out of whack. It's desiring more, it's craving more, it's never satiated, it's never, you know, satisfied with what it can do. It's always wanting to take the next thing. It's about taking and destroying and twisting and molding, whereas the light is more about being passive, letting things exist, letting life flourish, letting everything unfold the way it's supposed to, harmony. And I think that's what George meant a little bit more by the balance between light and dark in the balance and the force and the prophecy, is that there is a harmony to the galaxy and the darker side disrupts that harmony. And that's why it will truly be in balance if you destroy the dark side. But in as for your point with Master and Apprentice, I'd got to go back and look at the exact context of that quote. It has been a very long time since I've read Master and Apprentice, but if I'm sure it's related to something Qui-Gon says, and Qui-Gon was the one who studied that prophecy probably the most out of anybody. So I'm sure it's an interesting passage.
Yeah, it's a one for food for thought for sure, and I think I'm gonna try to talk my way through this one, thinking out loud here. But I guess you could say that, like, if you think about breathing, right, it's almost like something you don't think about. It just comes and goes, and that the moment between breaths, yeah, you're not you could technically, if that extends too long, you're not it's over. You're done. You stop existing as a person, right? But at the same time, when you control your breathing, you change how it is and all that, it does affect that kind of like, okay, like how does that stillness sit? Is it did you take a sharp breath here? Did you take a nice deep one and you're calm that like there it is come almost kind of like the result. It is like what is between the moments. It just is, right? So I think that is maybe how that was written, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's like a pretty interesting way for different authors, for different creators in Star Wars to be like, okay, if we want to talk about the Jedi kind of trying to enforce a balance a little bit more, maybe that comes out as the more rigid prequelisms about this is how we train these Jedi, this is how we select them. Balance for us means that it's just the Jedi. Then we maybe go for something where it's like, go with what's natural, what works for you, like breathe how you want to, and it all kind of comes together. All our breaths equal one great breath, right? And then it could be something like the unifying force, where you kind of have to balance the light. You kind of have to balance your internal dark, and it's going to be different for everybody. But that's kind of the whole point. So I think that's a really interesting way to look at balance, because how it's applied, how it's thought of, if it's a spiritual thing, if it's a practical thing, if it's something that can even be explained and all that. I mean, it seems like it's at the heart of the whole issue. Like, what does it really mean? And if it's tied to Qui-Gon and prophecies, right? We know that when he was a younger man, he was like very like against it, and Dooku kind of was starting to be open to it. And then as they both got older, they kind of both saw wisdom in it. They both had very different interpretations and all that. So if he's talking about that, that could just be some nice flowery prose that he's trying to find his own personal meaning out of. And I think that's how you should look at balance and how it's going to maybe be applied in a post chosen one world, in a world of storytelling that maybe moves away from that. Maybe we kind of move away from that Abrahamic image of Anakin, of the Messiah figure, and we're like, okay, that worked. Maybe that was a way of doing that, but then 300 years later, with different force families, different civilizations, okay, that doesn't really make sense. Balance means something totally different here now. Even at the underlying core, it is kind of there, right? So yeah, I think that's how I would look at it, that balance is just what it happens between the breaths, right? So, what does that mean? I mean, it's always gonna be shaped by the breath, it's gonna be shaped how it actually functions, how it comes out.
Well, there you go. And as a wrap up for tonight's stream, since we are going to be wrapping it up earlier tonight, I want to start using the poll function more on here because there are some newer tools that YouTube has added in the last few months that I would like to utilize more. So I put up a poll a little earlier. What did you guys think of Skeleton Crew episode 6? Did you think it was great, good, mediocre, bad? Right now, winning 69% thought it was great, 15% thought it was good, 15% thought it was mediocre. So we're going to do that. I'll do it earlier in the stream next week. But yeah, thanks for letting us know what you guys thought of this week's episode of Skeleton Crew. That's going to wrap up our stream tonight, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us and tuning in on this New Year's Eve edition of our Skeleton Crew episode lives. We'll be back next week in full for an hour and a half to 2 hour discussion about episode 7. Hopefully, it's a really exciting, juicy one. The plot is starting to come towards a big meeting at Atten across all the different forces in this this show. So hopefully they deliver something pretty fun to discuss next week in episode 7. Check out our predictions for episode 7. It will be out this weekend. Keep an eye out on the channel for more great content to come. If you haven't checked out our ranking of every single Star Wars canon novel, that is out on the channel as well. It is a longer video, but it's got every Star Wars canon book ranked on there, so there was a lot to discuss. Check it out. Excuse me, if you haven't. Join our Patreon, YouTube membership programs. If you join the lowest tier, it allows you to vote on the topic of the tier list every single month. So you can pick your own. A lot of other great options that you can utilize during these live discussions as well. Some emojis and all these different custom things you can add to the live stream if you are a member. So check it out. See if there's a perk that is right for you, a tier that is right for you. And we plan on giving you guys a lot of great content into the new year. We're going to be doing a live stream here in the next week or so as well, discussing our favorite Star Wars things of 2024. And then we're going to be doing a video giving you guys everything that's going to be coming out in 2025 from Star Wars and all the dates where you can expect to find each thing in 2025. So keep an eye out for those things. Those specific things are coming soon as well. Thank you so much for watching this week's stream, everybody. Happy New Year to you all, and we will see you all next week.